Captain John Harris had landed on the planet Cygnus with a simple mission, a routine survey of the planet's resources. The lush green landscape stretched out before him as he stepped off his ship and onto the alien soil. Cygnus had been discovered by human explorers just a few months ago, and now it was time to study it in more detail. The planet was home to an advanced species, but they were not yet ready to make contact with the human race. Harris was one of the few humans to set foot on their land. His boots made soft thuds against the ground as he walked through the dense forest. Birds with vibrant feathers flew overhead, and strange animals roamed freely in the distance. Harris had always been fascinated by new worlds, and Cygnus was no different. However, his attention was quickly drawn to something unusual. Through the trees, he saw a figure, tall, graceful, and unlike anything he had seen before. The alien woman stood there, observing him silently. Her skin was a soft shade of violet, and her eyes glowed with a bright, curious light. Harris froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. He had never encountered a being from Cygnus, but he knew it was likely she was part of the species that had been studied from afar. "Greetings," Harris said, his voice steady despite the surprise. "I am Captain John Harris, a representative of Earth. I come in peace." The alien woman stepped forward, her movements smooth and fluid, almost as if she was floating. Her eyes never left his as she approached him, tilting her head in curiosity. "I have heard of humans," she said, her voice musical yet with a hint of confusion. "But I did not think I would meet one in person." Harris blinked. "You're familiar with humans." "Of course," she replied. "My people have been watching you for a long time. Your ways, your technologies, your culture. We have learned much. But there is one thing that I do not understand." She paused, looking at him intently. "What is it that humans do with each other?" Harris was taken aback. He had not expected such a question, especially from an alien who seemed so calm and intelligent. He shifted on his feet, unsure of how to answer. "You mean humans and their relationships, how we interact with each other?" "Yes," she said, nodding slowly. "Your species, it seems, has a special connection with one another. We have observed it, but we do not fully understand it. The way humans form bonds, care for one another, it is very different from anything my people have experienced." Harris raised an eyebrow. "And you're interested in this connection?" The alien woman's eyes sparkled with a mix of wonder and curiosity. "I wish to understand it," she said simply. "I want to know what it is like to form such bonds with another. How do humans experience it? What makes it so important?" Harris hesitated. He had been trained to keep interactions with alien species professional, especially when they were still in the early stages of contact. But there was something about the way she asked, so innocent and full of curiosity, that made him want to help her understand. "It's not something that can be explained easily," he said carefully. "Human relationships are about trust, respect, and emotional connection. It's about sharing experiences and being there for one another, in both good times and bad." The alien woman listened intently, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to absorb every word. "I understand," she said, her voice thoughtful. "But I want to experience it myself. I want to feel what you feel. Can you show me?" Harris was caught off guard by her request. He had never been asked such a thing by an alien, especially one so unfamiliar with human emotions and connections. "It's not something that can be shown easily either," he said, trying to keep the conversation respectful and professional. "It's something that develops over time, through shared moments and experiences." She stepped closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. "Then perhaps I could learn. I want to know more. I want to experience what you feel, Captain Harris." For a brief moment, Harris felt a rush of uncertainty. It wasn't that he didn't want to help. He had always prided himself on helping others, especially when it came to bridging gaps between cultures. But this was different. The alien in front of him wasn't asking for knowledge. She was asking to experience something deeply personal. something human, and he wasn't sure he was prepared for that. "Maybe we could start with talking," Harris said, forcing a smile. "There's a lot to learn about human relationships. We can take it slow." The alien woman smiled back, her expression softening. "Yes, I..." As they sat down together on the grass, the sun began to set behind them, casting a warm golden light across the landscape. Harris and the alien woman, now introduced as Syruth, began their conversation. She asked questions about human emotions, relationships, and the ways in which people care for each other. And as they spoke, Harris couldn't help but feel a growing curiosity himself. Curiosity about Syruth, about her people, and the strange new bond that was beginning to form between them. Captain John Harris was surprised at how quickly Syruth absorbed the information he shared with her. She was unlike anyone he had met before, so eager to learn, so open to new ideas. As they spent more time together on the lush world of Tyros 9, Harris began to realize that Syruth wasn't just curious about humans. She was fascinated by human emotions and relationships. It had started as a simple request to understand, but now, it seemed, it was turning into something more. Over the next few days, their conversations grew deeper. Syruth would ask questions about everything, from human love to friendship, from trust to personal bonds. She seemed to absorb every word he said, carefully studying each detail as though it were a piece of a puzzle she was determined to solve. One evening, as the two of them sat by a small campfire, the warm light flickering between them, Syruth spoke again. "I think I understand now," she said softly, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight. "Human relationships, they are about connection. But there's something more to it, isn't there?" Harris looked at her, his brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, her voice growing more serious. "You spoke about trust, respect, and emotional connection. But when I look at you, I feel something more. Something that goes beyond just words. I want to feel what you feel when you connect with someone. Can you show me?" Harris felt his heart race at her words. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a demand, a need to experience human emotions firsthand. But how could he explain to her that relationships, true human connections, were not something that could simply be shown? They had to be built over time, through shared experiences, understanding, and care. He had to tread carefully. "Syruth," he began gently, trying to keep his tone calm. "What you're asking isn't something that can be easily demonstrated. Human relationships, they're built on time, shared moments, and respect. It's not something you can just rush into." Syruth tilted her head, listening intently, as though she were trying to process his words. "But I want to understand. I want to know what it feels like. I have observed humans from a distance for so long. Now I need to experience it myself. Can you help me, Captain?" Her voice was soft, but full of determination, and Harris found himself torn between his desire to help her understand and the nagging feeling that he wasn't prepared for the complexity of what she was asking. After a moment of silence, he sighed and nodded. "I can try to help you understand. But you have to remember, Syruth, human relationships aren't just about physical closeness. They're about trust, shared experiences, and respect. And that takes time." Syruth smiled, though her eyes were filled with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. "I am willing to learn. I want to experience what humans experience. I want to understand these feelings." And so their journey into human emotions began in earnest. For the next few days, Harris took a step back, deciding to guide Syruth through the emotional aspects of human relationships in small, manageable steps. They would talk about the bonds that humans form with family, friends, and lovers. Harris would explain the importance of listening, of being there for someone when they needed it the most, and how deep emotional connections could bring both joy and pain. But it wasn't just the abstract ideas that Syruth was interested in. She wanted to know about the physical side of things, the touch, the closeness, the way humans could connect in ways beyond words. She was fascinated by how simple gestures could mean so much, how a smile, a touch on the shoulder, or holding someone's hand could carry so much meaning. She watched Harris carefully as he spoke, trying to understand, trying to feel the depth of human emotions through the... One day, as they sat on the grass, Syruth suddenly reached out and placed her hand on his arm, her touch light and tentative. Harris felt a jolt of surprise at the contact, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he looked at her, unsure of what to do next. I want to understand," Syruth said quietly, her voice filled with a sincerity that made Harris's heart tighten. "I want to know how it feels. How humans feel when they connect with someone. How do you know when it's real?" Harris was silent for a long moment, thinking carefully. "You'll know," he said softly, his voice low. "You'll know because it feels right. It's a connection you can't explain, but you feel it deep inside. It's the way someone looks at you, the way they care for you, even when things get tough." Syruth's hand remained on his arm, and for a moment, the two of them just sat there, quietly. Harris couldn't help but notice the intensity in her eyes, the way she seemed to be searching for something more than just knowledge. She was searching for a feeling, an understanding, that went beyond anything she had ever known. As the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, the sky turning shades of orange and pink, Harris realized that Syruth's quest for understanding was not just about the mechanics of human relationships. It was about something much deeper, a longing for connection, for something she had never experienced in her own world. And as he looked at her, he realized that he too was beginning to feel something shift between them. Something that felt strange, but not unwelcome. As the days passed, Captain John Harris and Syruth grew closer in ways neither of them expected. What started as a simple exchange of knowledge about human emotions was evolving into something deeper. Syruth's curiosity was no longer just about learning. She seemed genuinely invested in understanding the complexities of human connection. And Harris, despite his initial hesitation, found himself becoming more drawn to her. One evening, after a long day of exploration and discussion, the two of them sat together in the shade of a large tree. The air was warm, and the breeze was gentle, rustling the leaves overhead. Syruth was once again asking questions about human relationships, her violet eyes focused on him with an intensity that made Harris feel exposed. She was quiet for a moment, as if contemplating something deeply. "Captain," she said slowly, her voice soft but serious, "I've been thinking about what you said. About trust. You said it was the foundation of any relationship, but I don't think I truly understand it yet. What does it mean to trust someone?" Harris looked at her, his expression thoughtful. He had been trying to explain the concept of trust for days now, but explaining something as abstract as trust was never easy. Trust is when you believe in someone, when you know that they will be there for you, no matter what. It's a bond that's built over time, through actions and experiences. When you trust someone, you let them see the real you, the part of you that you hide from everyone else. Syruth's eyes brightened as she absorbed his words. "So, trust is about showing your true self, and knowing that the other person won't harm you." Harris nodded. "Exactly. It's about vulnerability. When you trust someone, you're letting them into your life in a way that's different from any other connection. It's one of the deepest bonds you can form." Syruth fell silent, her gaze turning inward as she processed this new understanding. The forest around them was quiet, and for a moment, the only sound was the rustling of the wind through the trees. "You say trust is earned over time," Syruth said after a long pause. "But how do I know when I can trust someone? How do I know they won't betray me?" Harris took a deep breath, considering her question. It wasn't an easy one to answer, especially since he had seen trust broken many times in his life. But he believed in the strength of human relationships, and he hoped Syruth could understand. "It's not always easy to know," he said quietly. "People can surprise you, and sometimes they do things that break trust. But the key is consistency. You have to see how they act over time. If they prove themselves to you, If they show you they can be trusted, then you learn to believe in them. Syruth's eyes softened, as if she was beginning to understand. I see. So trust is not something that can be given easily. It's something that takes time to build, and something that can be lost if someone doesn't follow through. Harris nodded. Exactly. And once it's broken. The conversation lingered in the air, both of them deep in thought. Syruth seemed to be processing everything he had said, and for the first time, Harris wondered if he was seeing a change in her. Perhaps she was beginning to grasp the weight of human emotions, the vulnerability that came with truly connecting with someone. As the night began to fall, Harris stood up, stretching his arms. We should get some rest. Tomorrow, we can continue our exploration of the planet. Syruth stood with him, but there was something different in her demeanor. She seemed more grounded, more focused. Captain, I appreciate everything you've shared with me. I feel like I'm starting to understand a little more about your people, about what it means to trust, to connect with someone. But there's still so much I don't know. Harris smiled at her, feeling a warmth in his chest. That's the beauty of it. Syruth, there's always more to learn. And the more you experience, the deeper your understanding will become. As they made their way back to the ship, the sky above them was dotted with stars, a reminder that they were not just learning about each other, but also about the universe around them. The journey ahead would be long, but Harris was starting to realize that this mission, this connection with Syruth, was becoming something more than he had ever anticipated. The next day, they set out to explore the more remote areas of the planet, but as they ventured deeper into the unknown, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. There was a growing bond, something unspoken but felt between them, that neither could ignore. At the same time, Syruth's questions became more focused. She was no longer just asking about human emotions. She was asking about what it felt like to be a part of something, what it meant to be connected to another being, to share experiences, to support and care for someone. One evening, as they sat by a small fire after a long day, Syruth's eyes were intense with something Harris couldn't quite place. She was silent for a moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Captain, I trust you," she said, her words simple but filled with sincerity. "I trust you more than I've trusted anyone." Harris felt his heart race at her words. In that moment, he realized that he, too, was beginning to trust her. It wasn't just about teaching her the ways of humans anymore. It was about the connection they were forming. A connection based on trust, vulnerability, and a growing understanding of one another. The sun was high in the sky as Captain John Harris and Syruth trekked through the dense forests of Cygnus. The planet was vast and filled with strange beauty. But today, something felt different. There was a tension between them now, a quiet understanding that had been slowly growing over the past few days. Their connection had deepened, but neither of them could quite name what it was yet. Syruth had become more confident in her understanding of human emotions, asking fewer questions, and instead focusing on the experiences that made humans so complex. She had started to notice the little things, the way Harris would pause to listen to the sound of the wind, the way he would smile when he thought no one was looking, or how his eyes softened when he spoke about something that mattered to him. She was learning about human relationships, but something about Harris had begun to stir something deeper within her. She found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about learning anymore. It was about wanting to be closer to him. Today, they were making their way to a cliff that overlooked the planet's vast oceans. Harris had promised Syruth that they would see the sunset together, an experience he had described as something humans cherished, a moment of peace, a time to reflect on everything that had happened in the day. As they reached the cliff's edge, Harris set up a small campfire while Syruth surveyed the view. The sky was painted with hues of orange, pink, and purple, the sun slowly sinking toward the horizon. The waves below crashed against the rocks, sending mist into the air, creating a sense of calm that felt out of place in the midst of everything they had been through. Syruth walked over to the edge, her eyes locked on the sunset. There was a quiet awe in her expression, something Harris had come to recognize as her way of appreciating beauty. She turned to him, her face softening in the light of the dying sun. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice quiet, almost reverent. Harris smiled. "It is. There's something about sunsets that make you feel connected to everything. Like the world is turning slowly, and for a moment." Syruth nodded slowly, taking in his words. Then her gaze shifted back to him, and there was something in her eyes that made Harris pause. It was as though she was searching for something she hadn't found in all her time with him yet. "Captain," she began, her voice uncertain, "I've been thinking a lot about what we've talked about trust, about connection. And I feel like, I don't know how to explain it, but I feel something when I'm with you, something that's different from anything I've felt before." Harris felt his heart skip a beat at her words. He had known for some time that something was changing between them, but hearing her voice it out loud made everything feel more real. He wasn't sure what to say. He had always been the one in control, the leader of his crew, but here, with Syruth, he felt uncertain. He didn't know what she expected, or what this meant for their mission, or for their future. Before he could respond, Syruth stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "I trust you, Captain. I trust you with everything I have. And I want to understand what it means to truly connect with someone like humans do. But I don't know how." Harris swallowed hard. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the vulnerability she was showing him. For the first time, he realized that what Syruth was asking for wasn't just knowledge. It was a deeper connection. She wanted more than just to understand human emotions. She wanted to feel them, experience them the way humans did. He took a deep breath and stepped closer to her, feeling the air between them shift. "Syruth, I don't know what you're expecting from me. I'm just trying to help you understand. But there's more to this than I can explain. It's about time and experiences and learning from each other." Syruth's face softened, and she placed a hand on his arm, the touch gentle but firm. "I understand, but I still need to know. I need to know what it feels like to truly be connected, to know that I'm not alone in this galaxy." Harris looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. He could feel the weight of her words. She wasn't just asking for information anymore. She was asking for something real, something deep, something that, until now, he hadn't been prepared to give. He hesitated, then took her hand in his. "You're not alone, Syruth. I've never wanted you to feel alone. We're in this together, and whatever happens next, I'm here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, hands intertwined, as the last light of the sunset faded behind the distant mountains. The air around them felt still, as though the entire world had paused for this moment between them. And in that silence, Harris realized that this wasn't just about teaching Syruth what it meant to be human. It was about understanding her as well, about forging a connection that went beyond simple lessons. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Syruth finally spoke again, her voice softer than before. "I don't know where this will take us, Captain, but I trust you, and I want to keep learning, to keep understanding." Harris nodded slowly. "We'll take it one step at a time, Syruth. We'll figure it out together." And in that moment, standing together under the stars, both of them knew that their journey wasn't just about discovering new worlds. It was about discovering each other in ways neither of them had ever imagined. The days following their quiet moment by the cliff were filled with new challenges. As Captain Harris and Syruth continued their journey across Cygnus, the landscape changed drastically. The towering forests gave way to vast deserts, and the temperature fluctuated wildly, testing both of their endurance. But it wasn't just the harsh environment that they were facing, it was the growing tension between them. Syruth had been quiet, more introspective, and it seemed like she was wrestling with her thoughts. Harris noticed the change. She had always been open, curious about everything, but now she was often lost in her own world. It wasn't like her. One evening, as they set up camp in the desert, Harris decided to address it. "Syruth," he began, breaking the silence between them. "You've been quieter than usual. Is something on your mind?" Syruth didn't immediately respond. She was kneeling by the fire, her fingers tracing the sand as she stared into the flames. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked up at him, her eyes searching. "I've been thinking a lot, Captain," she said slowly, "about everything we've been through. About trust." Harris set down the tools he had been gathering, his focus entirely on her now. There was something in her voice, an uncertainty, that worried him. "What about?" "I've never trusted anyone before, not the way I trust you," she admitted. "And it's hard for me. I've always had to rely on myself, never on anyone else. But you're different. You make me feel like maybe it's okay to rely on you." Harris nodded, his heart tightening at her words. He understood her struggle. For someone like Syruth, who had lived alone for so long, letting someone else in must have been a difficult leap. And yet, here she was, opening up to him in a way that few ever did. "I understand, Syruth," Harris said gently. "Trust isn't something that comes easily. I know it's not something I've always been good at either. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere." Syruth's eyes softened as she listened to him. "I want to believe you, Captain. I really do. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just being foolish. What if I'm wrong to trust you? What if I'm making a mistake?" Harris sighed, his gaze drifting to the desert horizon. The setting sun cast long shadows across the sand, and for a moment, he felt the weight of their situation. They were out here, alone on this strange world, with nothing but each other to rely on. And in this vast, uncertain universe, trusting someone could feel like the most dangerous thing a person could do. "You're not foolish," Harris said firmly, his voice unwavering. "And you're not making a mistake. I've seen what you're capable of, Syruth. You're stronger than you think. And I'm here to prove that you can trust me." Syruth looked at him, her expression a mix of relief and doubt. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel safe, to feel that she wasn't alone in the universe. But the fear still lingered in her eyes. "You really think so?" she asked, her voice small, almost fragile. "I know so," Harris said with a soft smile. "But trust isn't something that happens overnight. It takes time. And we'll get there, one step at a time." Syruth's lips curved into a tentative smile, and for the first time in a long while, she seemed to relax. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back until that moment. The fear, the uncertainty, it had all been building inside of her. And now, with Harris' words, it felt like some of that weight had lifted. "Thank you, Captain," she said quietly. "You don't need to thank me," Harris replied. "I'm here for you, and I always will be." The fire crackled between them, casting a warm glow over the desert night. The stars above twinkled in the vast sky, endless and unchanging. For a brief moment, everything felt right. The world seemed to pause, and it was just the two of them, standing together in this strange, unfamiliar place, united by something neither of them could quite name yet. The next morning, as they continued their journey through the desert, Syruth seemed lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She walked beside Harris with more confidence, her steps firm and steady. The silence between them was comfortable now, a quiet understanding that spoke volumes without a single word being spoken. They still had many challenges ahead. Syros-9 was a planet filled with mysteries, and their mission was far from over. But one thing had changed. They had taken the first real step toward trusting each other. And with that, Harris felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could face whatever came next together. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its heat over the barren landscape, Captain Harris glanced at Syruth. There was still so much to learn about her, and so much to teach her about the world of humans. But now he knew that the bond between them was stronger than ever, and that trust, though fragile, had begun to take root. And that was enough. For now. The trek through Kairos-9's endless desert had taken its toll. The air was thick with dust, and the harsh sun blazed relentlessly overhead. The heat made it difficult to focus, and the dry winds carried a faint taste of salt that clung to their lips. But Harris and Syruth pushed forward, determined to continue their mission. The days had grown longer, and so had the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different. The kind of silence that spoke of mutual understanding, of trust slowly being built, one moment at a time. But even amidst the quiet, there were still challenges. The desert, vast and empty as it seemed, held dangers that neither of them had anticipated. One afternoon, as they navigated through a rocky canyon, Syruth suddenly stopped. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, her senses alert. Harris, noticing her sudden pause, followed her gaze. "What?" Syruth didn't respond immediately. She tilted her head, narrowing her eyes as if listening to something only she could hear. A slight chill ran down her spine, though the desert heat still surrounded them. "I don't know," she said cautiously, "but something feels off. I sense something approaching." Harris raised an eyebrow, his hand instinctively resting on the weapon at his side. He had seen enough strange things on this planet to trust his instincts, but he hadn't yet encountered any immediate threats. His eyes darted around, scanning the rugged terrain. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice calm but with a note of concern. "Yes," Syruth replied firmly. "There's a disturbance in the air. Something is coming." Harris didn't doubt her. He had come to trust Syruth's intuition, which had saved them more than once during their journey. Whatever was out there, they were about to find out. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, faint at first, but growing steadily stronger. The rocks around them shifted as if something was moving below the surface. Harris's eyes widened, and he instinctively grabbed Syruth's arm, pulling her back. "Stay close," he instructed. Before they could react further, a loud guttural roar echoed through the canyon. The sound vibrated through the air, sending ripples across the dust-filled landscape. The noise was deafening, like the roar of some massive creature, but more chilling in its tone. Harris and Syruth exchanged a brief glance, both knowing that whatever was coming wasn't something they could easily handle. "Do you know what that is?" Harris asked, his voice tight. Syruth shook her head, her face pale. "No, I've never heard anything like it, but it's not friendly." In the distance, the ground shifted once again, and from behind a large rock formation, a shadow emerged. It was enormous, the size of a small building, with dark, scaly skin that shimmered in the sun. The creature's eyes glowed red, a menacing hue that sent a wave of dread through both of them. Without thinking, Harris quickly began to formulate a plan. He needed to protect Syruth at all costs, even if that meant facing an enemy he had no knowledge of. He motioned for Syruth to stay back, positioning himself between her and the creature. "I'll distract it," Harris said, his tone unwavering. "Get to higher ground. Find a way to get a shot in if you can." Syruth hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Be careful, Captain." With a deep breath, Harris advanced, trying to keep his movements steady. He had faced many dangers in his life, but none like this. The creature's massive claws scraped against the rocks as it stepped forward, its enormous tail sweeping through the air like a weapon. Harris gripped his blaster, aiming it at the beast's glowing eyes, but before he could fire, the creature let out another deafening roar, and with a speed that surprised him, it lunged forward, its claws flashing in the sunlight. Syruth's heart raced as she watched the creature charge, her mind working quickly. She had to act. She couldn't let Harris face this alone. She turned and sprinted toward a nearby cliff, scrambling up the jagged rocks with agility she hadn't known she possessed. From her elevated position, she had a clear line of sight. Harris was holding his ground, but the creature was getting closer. She aimed carefully, her heart pounding in her chest, and fired. The shot landed square in the creature's eye, but it barely seemed to faze it. The creature roared in pain and fury, swiping at the air with its massive claws. Harris ducked, narrowly avoiding the strike, and rolled to the side. "It's tough," Harris shouted to Syruth. "Try another shot." Syruth didn't hesitate. She adjusted her aim, targeting the creature's other eye. She fired again, and this time the creature staggered, clearly weakened by the attack. Harris, seeing the opportunity, charged forward with surprising speed for someone in the heat of battle. He ducked beneath the creature's swiping claws, getting in close. With a quick move, he triggered a series of precise strikes to its exposed underbelly, finding a weak spot in its armored skin. The creature let out a final, anguished cry before collapsing to the ground, defeated. Panting heavily, Harris and Syruth looked at each other across the battlefield. Both were exhausted, their bodies aching from the fight, but they were alive. "That was too close," Syruth said, her voice shaky, but filled with relief. "Yeah," Harris agreed, his eyes scanning the area for any other surprises. The desert was quiet again, the only sounds the soft breeze and their heavy breathing. They had survived, but the experience left them both with a renewed sense of respect for the dangers of Syros-9. Syruth stepped down from her perch and approached Harris, her expression serious but grateful. "We make a good team," she said with a small smile. Harris nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They had, indeed, proven themselves capable of overcoming even the most dangerous challenges. But one thing was clear: they would face many more ahead. And as long as they had each other's back, they had a fighting chance. The desert was quiet now, the dust slowly settling after the intense battle. Harris and Syruth stood beside the fallen creature, their bodies tired but their spirits unbroken. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the rugged landscape. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came after surviving something great, a silence of relief. Harris wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced over at Syruth. She was staring at the creature, her expression thoughtful. He knew she was processing the events, trying to make sense of everything they'd just been through. He could see the wheels turning in her mind. "We've been lucky," Harris said finally, breaking the silence. "Too lucky. We need to move before something else finds us." Syruth turned to him, her eyes still filled with that same intensity they'd held since the first day they met. "I agree, but we can't keep running forever. There's something here, Harris, something we're meant to find." Her words were calm, but there was an urgency to them. Harris understood. He had felt it too. The pull, the sense that their journey had a purpose beyond survival. Whatever they had come to Syros-9 for, it was far from over. The desert, with all its dangers, still held secrets, and those secrets were waiting to be uncovered. "We'll move at first light," Harris decided. "But we need a plan. We can't keep stumbling around." Syruth nodded in agreement. "I'll start mapping out the area. There might be more to this desert than meets the eye." Harris watched her as she turned to survey the landscape, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. He knew that Syruth wasn't just looking for the obvious. She was looking for signs, for anything that might give them direction. She had an instinct for these things, an ability to see beyond the surface. It was one of the reasons he trusted her so completely. As the night grew darker, they set up camp near the remains of the creature. Harris built a small fire, its light flickering in the cool desert air. The warmth from the flames was a welcome relief, and for a brief moment, they'd both allowed themselves to relax. It had been a long day, filled with danger and uncertainty, but now they had a chance to rest. "I've been thinking," Syruth said suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. "We've fought off one danger, but there's still more to face. I can feel it." Harris looked at her, his brow furrowed. "You think there are more creatures like that?" Syruth shook her head, her expression serious. "Not just creatures. This planet. It has its own will, its own energy. It doesn't want us here. Harris felt a chill run through him. He had heard legends of planets with minds of their own, places that seemed to be alive, but he had never believed it. Until now. Zyros 9 was proving to be far more than just a hostile environment. It was as though the very land itself was pushing back against their presence. "We'll have to be careful then," Harris said, his voice low. "If the planet doesn't want us here, we might not get much help from it." Syruth nodded. "Exactly. But I still believe there's something important here, something we're meant to find." Harris leaned back, staring up at the stars. They were bright tonight, twinkling in the vast expanse of the sky. The silence of the desert, the flickering fire, and the cool night air all seemed to fade into the background as he considered her words. He had never been a man of destiny. He had always believed in making his own path, in shaping his own future. But as he looked out over the barren land, he couldn't shake the feeling that Syruth was right. There was something about Zyros 9, something ancient and powerful, waiting for them to uncover it. And for the first time in a long while, Harris felt the weight of something bigger than himself pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he knew he couldn't walk. "We'll find it," Harris said finally, his voice steady with determination. "Whatever it is, we'll find it." The next morning, they packed up their camp and set out again, their resolve stronger than ever. As they journeyed deeper into the desert, Syruth led the way, her instincts guiding them toward a distant mountain range on the horizon. It was a new path, one neither of them had anticipated, but it felt right. The trek was harder than before, the terrain more treacherous, but they pushed forward, step by step. The land seemed to fight against them at every turn, as if it were trying to hold them back. But Harris and Syruth didn't give up. They kept moving, driven by the belief that they were on the verge of discovering something monumental. Hours passed, and just as they were beginning to feel the strain, Syruth stopped. She turned to Harris, her face filled with a mixture of awe and certainty. "It's here," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "This is what we've been looking for." Harris looked ahead, his heart racing. In the distance, nestled between the towering mountains, a strange structure emerged from the earth. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, an ancient ruin, covered in symbols and carvings that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "This is it," Harris said, his voice full of awe. "We found it." Syruth nodded, her eyes shining. "And this is just the beginning." Together, they walked toward the ruin, ready to uncover the secrets it held. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they were no longer afraid. They had come this far, and they would face whatever